I'm James Rule. Welcome to the Lonely Leader podcast, where we help existing and aspiring leaders find clarity, build resilience, drive performance, and enhance fulfillment. Today I'm talking about courage, which is the latest leadership trait that I want to feature in our Leadership Essentials series. Courage for me is a leadership essential, and it manifests itself in so many facets of leadership. And I wanted to pull a few of those into this episode of the Lonely Leader podcast. So first and foremost, the courage to make a decision. As ever, I make no apology for stating the blindingly obvious, but you will be required to make an inordinate amount of decisions on a daily basis. That is a key component of being a leader. It's unavoidable. Now, what's difficult is retaining your ability to be decisive. And I always talk about an analogy that I heard from Colin Powell. I've mentioned it on previous podcast episodes, but Colin Powell, during his military service in the US military, had a principle. And he used to talk about the fact that if you make knee-jerk decisions, particularly in the military arena, when people's lives and deaths are dependent on those decisions, then with a knee-jerk decision, you are being negligent. You are putting people's lives in danger unnecessarily. You have to gather intelligence. However, he also made the counter argument that if you spend too much time trying to gather 100% of the available intelligence, then you drift into procrastination. And by doing that, you are taking too long, and you are also putting people's lives at risk. So his principle was the 40-70 principle, that you need at least 40% of the intelligence, otherwise you are being reckless. But once you get anywhere up to around 70% of the available intel, you have to pull the trigger and make a decision. Because to wait any longer, you drift into that procrastination, and that was negligent as a leader. Now, that principle sounds great in theory, but in practice, it takes courage to be decisive, because particularly in those roles that are very much in the public eye. I spent a lot of time operating in the very intense sports sector, and that every decision you make is going to be scrutinized by media and thousands of supporters of your organization. And therefore, it requires courage to say, I am going to make a decision. Based on the intelligence that I have, I'm going to make a decision knowing that it may be right or it may be wrong. But the best leaders are decisive, and the best leaders have the courage to listen to the feedback from their team, to trust their gut, and to make that decision. The next area I want to cover with regard to courage is the courage to give talent a chance. I've talked in previous episodes about how essential it is for leaders to retain an open mind about where their talent comes from. It doesn't all have to be the same type of individual or with the same tenure or the same level of experience. You have to be able to keep your eyes and ears open to say, where are the talented people in my organization, and how as a leader do I help support them? Now, in the sporting arena where I spent a lot of time, it's very common for leaders, in effect the coaches or the senior management of a sporting franchise, to give young, inexperienced talent a chance. They see people with ability, and irrespective of their age, the old adage, if you're good enough, you're old enough, they put those people out onto the field of play. Now, that principle is very established in sport, but it is certainly not the case in mainstream industry. Invariably, in that environment, we've been conditioned to think that we move up the hierarchy of an organization based on experience and longevity of service. Now, I didn't embrace that. In my 10 years as a chief executive, I would look for talent. It didn't matter if people were old or young. In the perception of age, I appreciate is different for everybody, but I had people retrain and move from one department to another in their late 50s and early 60s. And equally, I was comfortable giving people who were still in their late teens opportunities to excel. But I do think it takes a higher level of courage to give young, inexperienced staff a chance, because the odds are stacked against you in the short term. It is likely they will make mistakes, but it is through allowing them to make those mistakes that they learn, they develop experience to then realize their true potential. And if you can have the courage to give young, inexperienced talent a chance and the courage to absorb the potential ripple effects of some of the mistakes they will make in the short term, then you will undoubtedly be rewarded by the benefits they bring to your organization and to your team in the medium to longer term. And I look back with real pride on my career that 5 different individuals that operated within my leadership teams went on to become chief executives, and so many of those progressed through the internal ranks of the organization. So I think it's really important to have the courage to say, if I see talent, irrespective of age, irrespective of experience, I'm going to back them. I'm going to invest in them. I'm going to help develop them, bring out the best of their abilities, train them, share my wisdom and insights, because it's a key legacy component for any leader that you have made the people around you better as a consequence of them being in your orbit. The next area where courage is essential is having an ability to show vulnerability and to admit a skills gap. And for those of you that have listened to previous episodes, you'll have heard me articulate the rationale behind branding my business The Lonely Leader. And in a nutshell, it's because too many leaders fear showing any sort of skills gap. They labor under this deluded mindset that because I'm the leader, I have to have all the answers to every challenge and every problem. I need to understand every facet of the business in microscopic detail. And if I can't do that, I'm failing as a leader. And that deluded mindset leads to them having a fear to move up to their chain of command, their direct supervision, their management, their board, their chair, and express a skills gap for fear of what their consequence of that would be. And equally, there's a fear to go down into their management team and show any sort of skills gap, because they're operating in this mindset of, what will people think? They'll be wondering, why don't I have the answers? You're the leader after all. So I spend a lot of time in my coaching and mentoring debunking that. If you look at a sporting analogy, you don't go and watch a soccer team or basketball team, any sporting discipline, and expect every man or woman on that team to be able to play every single position. That's impossible. That's why there's a team. People specialize in different areas. So we have to have the courage to put our hand up and ask for help when we have areas where there are gaps in our knowledge or gaps in our skill base. And with that courage, we're then able to find solutions. We're then able to find the right mentors or the right training to close that gap, to fill that particular void. And that's completely reasonable. Any leader needs to have a very open growth mindset and recognizing that there will be multiple times where you are challenged and you don't have the answers. And there is nothing wrong with expressing that and saying, I don't have that answer, but I will come back to you when I do. It's human nature, but it takes courage to be willing to do that. And last but not least, I think it's important to be able to have the courage to be disliked. Whatever sector you are in, once you move into leadership, it is a practical impossibility to please all of the people all of the time. Whether you are looking at a small team of people that you supervise, whether you are talking about a huge multinational organization, the scale is irrelevant. The principle is the same. There will be people who agree with what you do, and there will be people who disagree. And you have to have the courage to make the call that you believe is the right call, knowing that there will be some people that disagree, and equally knowing that with the benefit of hindsight, people will challenge your decisions and critique your decisions. And one of the best definitions I've ever come across for high performance came from a gentleman called Phil Neville, a former professional footballer. And he said that high performance is being able to do the best that you can in the moment you are in with the resources that you have available. what people often forget when they're dissecting situations with the benefit of hindsight is they don't place themselves in the particular moment that that leader was, and they don't pay enough regard to the level of resource the leader had at that particular moment. They simply look at the outcome and make a very binary decision. Was it a good or bad decision? But you have to have the faith in yourself to say, I have these resources available. This is the moment I'm in. I'm going to make a decision, and some people will dislike it. And it ties back to our initial point in this podcast episode about being decisive. Once you accept that you can't please everybody, it's quite liberating. And also, you must give yourself the comfort that if you make a decision and you subsequently receive new intelligence or new insights or new feedback from your team or customers that it's not the right decision, well, then you have the wonderful situation of being able to course correct and make another decision. Rather than get trapped in procrastination and fear, have the courage to keep stepping forward. Most of the time, you'll make the right call, but on the occasion where you don't, you can make a new decision and you can course correct. So I hope these small examples have been useful to prompt you to reflect on how can you bring courage to your leadership style and the benefits that will occur as a consequence. Thanks for listening to the Lonely Leader podcast. I'd be very grateful if you could share and follow if the content resonates. And if you're looking for additional free resource to support your continued growth and development, then please do check out our social media and website details in the show notes. Remember, quality leadership on the outside must always start within.